Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the brand new Stephen King adaptation Firestarter, which is a second adaptation. There was one in the 80s with Drew Barrymore, and that movie is a movie that I just recently watched and have very mixed feelings, but I definitely was on the negative side of that film, as most people are. And so what did they do with this new remake? Well, not much to like at all. If anything, this movie is so much worse than the original one, which I'm kind of surprised by. First off, this will be a spoiler review, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about spoilers. I'm not going to go super in depth because, quite frankly, there's not much to spoil, especially if you've seen the original movie. In large ways, this is very similar to that first one, especially in the first half hour of this movie. And the rest of this movie, really nothing of note happens. This movie is directed by Keith Thomas, who directed The Vigil, which is a very, very underrated horror movie. I saw Chris Duckman review it and I really wanted to watch it. And I watched that just a few months ago and I absolutely loved that film. And it really does feel like this movie was very much just meddled with the studio, or just the artist didn't get to go full on, take this source material and really dive into it. And I haven't read the book either, so I don't really know too much about how this movie is either more faithful than the original adaptation, or this one is a lot less faithful. Quite frankly, I don't know and I don't care, because this movie really doesn't do much to further the artistic style or the artistic, thoughts of Firestarter to begin with. It's a very generic movie, and it does the thing that I was most worried that this movie would do, and it turns this concept and this idea into a superhero movie because of the superhero landscape that we have now in 2022. Everything is superhero movies, and this movie stars a character who can literally spontaneously combust something on fire with her superpowers, and you have her dad having this mind control ability that is essentially a superpower, and they were experimented on in the past, and then they were given these superpowers, and now all these people who experimented on them in the past now want to go and find them. And it's very generic and cliched, and that's the problem that I had with the original movies. It felt like so much of a Stephen King adaptation. It felt like, oh, there's this special kid with these special abilities who's on the run from these, government people, and they get captured, and they're in this facility, then they're being experimented on. It felt very 80s. It felt very Stephen King. And this movie feels very 2022. It feels very superhero-like, and it is just like, it doesn't have an identity of its own. There certainly was no directorial flair in this movie whatsoever. And like I said, I love The Vigil, and it just feels like, man, they really took this film away from this director who had a lot of promise with that directorial debut. And so in terms of this movie in general, let's get into some of the details. This movie, the first 30 minutes is almost identical, carbon copy of what happened in the original movie. And I will say the performances in this movie and the attempt at horror this movie has in the first half of this movie is actually pretty decent. This movie's not complete garbage. I do like Zac Efron in this role more than the actor who played him in the 80s movie, because again, that movie felt very 80s, very cheesy acting, especially from the dad that I did not enjoy. The mom and dad in this movie are not too bad, and I really liked how this movie tried to do horror. When the mom is being attacked in her home by Rain Man, that was a very intense scene. There was some tension that was built in these moments. When the girl is at her school and she's dealing with her powers and trying not to lose control at certain times, it got pretty intense. The bathroom scene, although it had some cheesy moments, some cheesy lines from some bullies at the school, it really did have some sort of tension and trying to build that horror tone that this movie wants to have. It just seems to completely lose it once these characters are on the run. And there's a lot of moments in this movie where it's just very cliched dialogue. One example that I can give you is the trope in superhero movies where you have a little girl who says like, oh, I'm going through some changes inside and I don't know how to deal with it. And she's talking to her dad, and her dad's like, oh my gosh, let me go get your mom. I don't know how to deal with this. Puberty, am I right? It's like, no, dummy, it's not puberty, it's her superpowers. It's such a tired cliche, and the dialogue in this is so just cliche. There's even a line in this movie where, in our heads as an audience, we're like, what? And even my friend sitting next to me was like, what? And then the character in the movie responded by saying what? It's like we predicted the lines in this movie. There's so many cliched dialogue pieces that you'll see sprinkled throughout this entire thing where it's like, yeah, I've heard that exact line with this exact same rating in a million movies before. Another cliched moment is when the dad and the daughter are on the run. This even happens in the last movie. They stop over at this little farmhouse, and there's this guy that is trying to he's essentially taking them in because, they were found on the street. They were kind of hitchhiking. He's like, okay, come to our house. I'll feed you guys and you can stay over for the night before you get on the move again. Basically it happened. Same thing in Logan. The same thing happened. It's just like, I've seen this before. And yes, there are some good moments with this, guy being flip-floppy with it. He overreacts with everything, which is just like, okay, that's your one character trait. You know, good job. You're doing your one character traits really well. And I'm not just bagging on the performances in this way. The performances are fine, but it's just really the dialogue. There's so many cheesy moments. The little girl sees a cat at one point, and I was saying in my mind, please, please, movie, just do one thing in some entertaining way and just light this cat on fire. And she does. She burns this poor cat to death, and the cat is like still on the ground, you know, being like all scarred and all like burnt up, and it's the fur is burnt off, and it's, you know, horribly mutilated, and then it's still alive, and Dad's like, you can't just leave it here. You got to put it out of your misery. You gotta just kill this thing. And it's just like, okay, this is just it's really dumb. But one thing that I did enjoy about this movie in terms of the father and the daughter relationship is, you know, when the daughter lights her mom's arms on fire and she gets injured and she gets attacked by Rain Man and she gets killed by Rain Man and all these things, when the dad and the daughter get back from, you know, getting ice cream or whatever, she says like, it was meant for you, because the dad was being very rude and the mom was trying to comfort her, but it still wasn't able to, you know, settle her down, and she was angry enough to try to light something on fire, and she was trying to set the dad on fire, but it set the mom on fire. And there's one great moment where they had that moment where she was like, it was meant for you. But again, these storylines and these moments of good dialogue, or these moments of good, you know, moments in this film with either good tension or good horror or good whatever it is, it just never goes anywhere with the last half of this movie, which is kind of devolved into generic superhero movie. One of my favorite parts of the original movie was George C. Scott as Rain Man, and once they were captured in the original movie, they were in the facility for the entire last like 2/3 of that film. And so you had, you know, Rain Man kind of integrating himself into this hospital and kind of trying to manipulate Drew Barrymore as the daughter. And Drew Barrymore and George C. Scott were phenomenal in those roles, and I really liked their relationship, even though it was a manipulative one. I really liked following that throughout the film and seeing that arc of how Rain Man betrayed them and the daughter realized that, and Dad kind of sacrificed himself for those reasons. Like, yes, there's a lot of good stuff in that movie, besides, you know, the cheesy acting and how silly it is to see somebody light somebody on fire. And that's another problem with these storylines. It's just, they never go anywhere. Rain Man in this film is just kind of one of those silent type Terminator type characters who is sent in to be kind of the badass and to take them out, and there's no character, there's no personality for this character. There's no reason for him to be in this story other than he's the character from the original one. He's a character from the book. It just, they had nothing to do with him. He had no personality, which is such a bummer, because he was one of my favorite characters and one of the more interesting characters in the original film. And again, when you have a concept of a character who can just spontaneously light people on fire, it comes off as funny. In the original one and still in this one, there's scenes where, you know, she lights, you know, people's heads on fire and they burn, or she sees this one lady and says, liar, liar, pants on fire, and lights her pants on fire. It's like, it's so silly and dumb. There's one scene where a bunch of people are coming in these fireproof suits and she's just blasting fire at them, and they're not being harmed because they're in fireproof suits, but it clearly looks like a flamethrower, somebody with a flamethrower just like lighting these people on fire, and her just like doing this with like her hair being blown. It just doesn't work. It comes off as really cheesy and ridiculous. And quite frankly, I knew this movie was in trouble. And the movie opens with the scene of flashback of her as a baby, and she lights, you know, her little thing that's floating above her cradle. You know, she lights that on fire, and it falls and barely misses her. And Zac Efron is holding the baby, terrified, and all of a sudden her head lights on fire. And then the dad wakes up from a dream sequence. It's like, what? What is this movie? It just it made me laugh. That is the worst part about this movie, is all these things in this film. They just frankly made me laugh. So that will be my review of Firestarter. Definitely not a positive one. There's so much in this movie that I just could not grasp onto. Even the moments where I thought I was starting to enjoy the movie, it just ripped that right away from me, because it did something incredibly stupid immediately after. So have you guys seen Firestarter? Are you going to see Firestarter? What is your favorite Stephen King adaptation? I do love Dr. Sleep. I have my Dr. Sleep poster up for a reason. So what are your guys' favorites from Stephen King? Definitely let me know what you guys thought. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and I hope to see you all in my next one.